Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mindful Marathon Conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Quirk. I'm a pediatrician and a run coach and the founder of Mindful Marathon, where I help make running easy and fun for busy professionals. And today I have a very, very special guest with me. I have a dear colleague and friend, Dr. Dana Gibbs. She is an educator, hormone expert, board certified ENT and allergist, and she recently retired from her ENT practice and opened Consultants in Metabolism, which is a direct care practice for thyroid, metabolic, and hormone management for women and men. And I am very excited to welcome her to the show. Dr. Dana Gibbs, welcome.
Thank you so much. I am excited to be here. This is really good. This is really fun.
Well, we were chatting beforehand. There are so many places, but perhaps we could start with maybe tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about your story and how we ended up here.
Yes. Okay. I am an ENT specialist. That's ear, nose, and throat for those who don't recognize that. And part of what I did in my ear, nose, and throat practice was do surgery on people's thyroid glands. And so that's kind of been in my, back of my mind, in my repertoire for a long time. And the funny thing about that is that it turned out that as I was sitting in a lecture one day hearing about some alternative approaches to thyroid, they listed all these symptoms. And as they went down the list, I was like, yep, got that one. Yep, got that one. Yep, got that one. And by the time he got to the list and I had 80% of the things on the list, I was like, oh my gosh, I have a thyroid problem.
Wow.
And this was after I had finished a surgical residency, finished med school, was out in training, had started a practice, had merged a practice. I mean, it was, there was an incredible amount of stress and lost sleep and I don't know, frankly, self abuse in my history.
Hmm.
And during all of that, I had gone to the health clinic and they'd said, oh, here, you're you're just tired. Here's some antidepressants, blah, blah, blah. Nobody ever said, hey, this could be thyroid. Well, I mean, they checked my TSH, but nobody ever said, hey, there's thyroid issues that go along with these extreme levels of stress that could be, um, that you could have. And until I saw that list and went, oh boy, I didn't realize that,
Yeah.
up until that point, to me, you had to be overweight to have thyroid problems.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yes, a lot of people who have thyroid problems are overweight, but you don't have to be.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I mean, some of my worst patients are, BMI of like 20, really thin people.
Yeah.
Um, and
Hmm.
so, yeah, it was just and I don't know when that first started. I suspect it started when I was a senior in high school. I got really, really sick.
Hmm.
And after that, I was just tired all the time. I just
Hmm.
um,
I was going to ask
never,
what symptoms on the list you were feeling. So
oh
tired all the
boy,
time.
tired
Okay.
all the time, needing to sleep,
Hmm.
I don't know, 10 plus hours a day and still feeling sleepy,
Okay.
foggy brain, having a hard time memorizing stuff. And during med school, that's all you do
Yeah,
is just
I know.
memorize stuff
Yeah.
all day long. And I had a terrible time memorizing stuff.
Yeah.
Um, Cold. My
Hmm.
hands were freezing, my feet were freezing.
Okay.
When everybody else was like, "Ah, it's hot in here." And I'm like, nope, I'm cold.
Wow. Okay.
um, I would go to bed so cold that I would lay there and not be able to fall asleep because my feet and my hands were so
Wow.
cold.
Okay.
Until I got up, got
Yeah.
in the shower, heated myself up, and then I would wake up later like drenched in sweat. So this hot cold thing, that's a big thyroid thing.
Okay.
Digestion issues, constipation, dry, itchy skin, sometimes even hives.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then weight, like you could eat bark and twigs and still not lose weight for some people. I mean,
Yeah.
my deal was my reaction to stress is I'm not hungry, I don't eat.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I don't know, the new term, the new trend now is skinny fat, I think. I had no muscle on me.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think that's another issue with thyroid that really hasn't gotten a lot of airplay is the difficulty gaining muscle
Hmm.
when you go to the gym and try to work out. I never worked. I wasn't a gym person at that point in my
Hmm.
life.
Hmm.
Um, I tried to be in college. I tried to do gymnastics, which is a kind of a laugh, but um,
No, it's not.
it is because I mean, my upper body strength was horrible at the time. But but anyway, yeah, just very very thin, but no muscle tone
Muscle.
to
Yeah.
speak of. So yeah.
How did you end up tying this back to stress and figuring this out? So you saw that you had the lecture, you were like, "Oh my goodness, this is me."
Mhm.
Yes. Then what happened?
Okay, well, so at the time when I went to that lecture, I he didn't say a whole lot about stress. I mean, he mentioned it a little bit and he was giving people small doses of cortisone, like hydrocortisone,
Oh, okay.
which I don't actually think most people need, but he mentioned stress, kind of in passing and oh, I give hydrocortisone to people. And I was like, I don't think that's me. And I'm really glad I didn't try that. Um, but I did start myself on Armor Thyroid at the time, and it was like this miraculous change for me. All of a
Wow.
sudden, I was like, I'm awake. I can remember things. I don't need to sleep all the time. Um, I have energy. I'm not freezing.
Hmm.
My GI tract doesn't, it's not all glommed up all the time. I mean, yeah, there were just so many things that changed for me that were for the better. Um, and I'm kind of a curious and persistent person. And once I got over the fact that um I didn't feel, so tired I could barely drag myself through the day anymore, I was like, hey, I want to know why this works.
Hmm.
And I finally found somebody who taught me what was going on and presented the research in a well-reasoned way and said, here's how I monitor, here's how I test, here's how I follow, here's what I do, and here are the 7 reasons why this happens to people,
Hmm.
5 of which are stress related.
Oh,
And so
okay. Okay.
it was like, okay, I get it, I get it.
Wow.
I'll try to sleep more. you know
Wow. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Um,
So yeah, it was crazy stuff.
yeah. I mean, of course, I feel like know, right, that stress is not great for the body, right? Like I feel like I know that, but like
Mhm, mhm.
what does stress do to the body?
Okay. So stress is anything that your brain perceives as a threat to your survival.
Mhm.
Okay. So, of old, the classic thing is, oh, the tiger's after me, right?
Yeah.
So your brain goes, I'm afraid. And when you have that fear emotion, your hormones get a signal and your adrenal glands start pumping out cortisol. And
Mhm.
cortisol is the stress hormone. Everybody's probably heard of cortisol. Um, and cortisol comes right after adrenaline. I mean, like say you're on the freeway and somebody cuts you off and you nearly have an accident. You get this little pop of
Mhm.
adrenaline, your heart's racing and you're sweating and um and then you're just like, 15, 20 seconds it's calming down, and if not, and if everything's okay, you just kind of go on and it fades away. But if the stress is still there at 30 seconds,
Mhm.
then the cortisol comes out and it starts pumping up and it raises your blood pressure. It raises your blood sugar by a couple of mechanisms. One of them is it dumps a bunch of sugar out of your liver.
Mhm.
Um, 2, it raises something called insulin resistance, which I'm sure that you and maybe a lot of your clients are familiar with. If they're not, we can talk about what that is.
Mhm.
So, insulin resistance raises your blood sugar, um, so that there's enough sugar to fuel your muscles so you can run away from the tiger,
Right.
or so you can get away from the oncoming onslaught of war or famine, or you can survive being lost in the jungle, or not having anything to eat, or, all the kind of primitive things that actually threaten our survival. Getting kicked out of the tribe, for example, that's a big one for
Mhm.
women, especially.
Okay.
That one
Yeah.
seems to be a thing. And all of those situations tend to trigger these 5 trigger emotions, which are shame, fear, um, hang on, sadness, disgust, and anger. Those are the 5.
Okay.
And when your brain compares a situation that you're in to something that's in its remote memory and goes, "Oh, our survival is threatened." And then you feel the emotion and boom, out comes the hormones.
Okay.
Okay. And those hormones, once the cortisol is there, it hangs around.
Yeah.
And like, for example, if your kid is sick,
Mm.
then you lay there in bed and you can't fall asleep because you're just listening for that cry. You know it's coming. Even if they're kind of already well, you're
Mhm.
still like, "Ugh, I'm hyped up. I'm waiting. I'm listening."
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so that's one. If you're on call, same thing.
Oh,
If you're
yeah.
if you're wearing a beeper, then you never get all the way asleep
Nope.
because you're just waiting for that beeper to buzz. Even if they never call you,
Yeah.
it's still like that. And that's because cortisol has done something called raise your sympathetic tone.
Mhm.
Okay. Sympathetic tone sounds good, but it's not. So sympathetic tone is like, okay, so there's 2 parts of your involuntary nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And the parasympathetic is the part that helps you digest your food, helps you relax, it helps you fall asleep, helps you repair any cellular damage that you have. It helps you feel good, have a good mood, want to procreate the species, that kind of thing. So that's what
Yeah.
parasympathetic is. Sympathetic is fight or flight.
Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom. That's it. And when sympathetic tone is up, that means your body is in fight or flight mode and it turns off all that other stuff, the parasympathetic
Mm.
stuff.
So it's
So
it's always preparing us to run from the lion, even if the lion is not there.
it's preparing you to fight a war. It's preparing you to, go hunting so that you can eat something so you can
Yeah.
survive. It's the other thing that it does, which is really interesting, is that it prepares you to survive a famine.
Mm.
And this is where modern stress really kind of gets people
Mhm.
because it turns on this scenario where if your insulin goes, if your insulin resistance is high, then your blood sugar is going to be high, which means your insulin is going to be high. When your insulin is high, you can diet all you want. You're never going to lose an ounce of fat. You can starve yourself and you will not lose an ounce of fat. Guess what you're
Mhm.
going to lose? Your muscles. Um, so it's really stress is not a good thing if it's ongoing and high level. And so
Yeah.
it's super, super important to recognize where stress is coming from and realize that your primitive brain is not a discerning, logical thinker.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, no, it does. I feel like we got a master class in stress. What I really wanted to get into what is how I mean we need a little bit of this stress response, right? If I'm going to run a marathon or if I'm showing up to race day and I'm going to run this 5K. But
Yes, absolutely.
right, how do we, I think the question, or it's a big question, but how do we balance that with rest and firing up the parasympathetic so that we don't have
Mm.
all of those bad things happen because of the stress?
Right. Well, okay. So the first thing is you just have to accept that if you're really going to run a marathon,
Mhm.
and you're going to run it at a speed that is, at your personal best, as fast as you can go,
Mhm.
um, that's a stressful event to
Yeah.
your life,
Yes.
and cortisol is happening. Truthfully, if you didn't have cortisol, you couldn't do it. and one of the examples I use of that is that, you're late for your flight and they're delaying you through security and now you're running to catch your plane. Somebody who's got Addison's disease, for example, if they try to rush, they could literally drop dead of hypoglycemia. And so, we make it sound like cortisol is such a bad thing, but it is necessary
Yeah.
for your life. But yes, you have to balance that with time in the parasympathetic, because if
Hmm.
you don't, so let's just think of one of the things. So if you
Okay.
have high cortisol all the time, then your GI tract is basically not doing anything. Okay. Because that's one of the things that gets turned off is digestion.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, our feel good hormones, almost all of them, like the serotonin, and they come from your GI tract. 90% of your
Mm-hmm.
serotonin comes from your GI tract. That's where it's produced. And so if you are on all the time, you don't have enough serotonin. You're going to feel anxious, depressed, um, down. You're not going to feel good.
Good.
And if you keep pushing yourself and you don't give yourself the opportunity to get into parasympathetic
Hmm.
sometimes, then eventually you'll have digestive issues. Eventually, you could end up with diabetes because the high cortisol pushes your insulin up, like we were talking about before.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's just so many things that happen during recovery
Yeah.
that have to do with letting the cortisol fall back down,
Hmm.
you know? Um, so I was listening to another podcast, and it was with a fellow who trains Olympic athletes.
Okay.
And he was talking about zone two.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're familiar with zone two. Probably your audience is very familiar with zone two. He trains cyclists.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Um, And what he said is that 60 to 80% of their workout needed to be in zone two. And the thing about zone two is that it's just high enough that you can use fat for fuel,
Hmm.
but not high enough to pump your cortisol up. And so it's a fine line that you walk.
Yep.
And so you eat your high fat meal, you eat your carbs, you burn them all up during your zone two. You get cardiovascularly very fit by doing
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Um, and then, maybe 2 or 3 days a week, then you sprint and
Yep.
you just go as hard as you possibly can. And then you rest. You
Hmm.
take a recovery day. And
Hmm.
then next day you get up and you do whatever, like weight training, as heavy as you can possibly lift. And then you go and you do what's called a cool down. And you cool down in zone two again.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and that pulls your blood sugar down. It pulls your cortisol down, allows you to level out, and then go about the rest of your day
Hmm.
without those high cortisol bouncing
Spikes.
around in your
Yeah.
bloodstream all day long. So, yeah, it was just fascinating
Fascinating.
to me.
Yeah,
Um,
everybody listening, so I do talk about zones, but my
mhm,
runners might understand it more when I'm writing a training plan, like
mhm.
80% or more of the running in a week is at what we would call like easy or conversational pace. So if you
Yes.
go by like a level of effort scale, that is like maybe a 3 to 4 out of 10 max.
Okay.
And if I have people who are wanting to get faster or working on speed, usually that's only one workout a week and maybe
Mhm.
one long run in a week because those
Mhm.
are really the most stressful of
Yes.
of the workouts. But it's the same idea, and I hadn't thought about it really from a cortisol perspective, but it's all working together. And after a hard workout, after a speed workout or after a long run, usually I'm recommending rest or perhaps like cross training with something like cycling easy or swimming easy or walking
Mhm.
easy being the key word to
Well,
allow the body to recover.
yes, yes, easy and no higher than zone two. Not,
Yep.
if you go up to zone three, then yeah, then you're back to the cortisol going up.
Think this is all, it's a really good invitation for everybody to just have a look at your heart rates. So, if you have a watch that measures heart rate on the run, it is a good idea to see what zone you're in. And that's
Hmm.
part of the data that I keep with my athletes, like within the training plan. But if we're not working together, it's just something interesting to look at to see where
Hmm.
you're hanging out when you're on your most of your regular runs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very,
Yeah.
very interesting.
Would
Okay.
you would you have advice? I know that there are a lot of runners out there who have a hard time resting. We love running and we would do it every day, probably, if left to our own devices. And a lot of what I teach is about embracing the rest and recovery, so that
Hmm.
we can run the way we want to and injury free.
Yes.
But
Hmm.
advice for those of us out there who are having trouble resting.
Oh boy. Well, I'll tell you what helps me rest more than anything is yoga nidra. And, our friend Rashmi is
Mhm,
the the queen of yoga, the yoga nidra, and has taught me that. And I listen to those recordings almost every day.
mhm.
Um, and more because not because I want to jump up and go exercise. I mean, I do exercise. I go
Yeah.
to the gym twice a week and lift as heavy as I possibly can. I mean, I do, whatever progressive overload, I think
Hmm.
is what you call that.
Yep.
Um, and then I walk and I swim. I do, I do some stuff, but I'm not in the tribe with you people who love to run. It's just never been a thing for me.
That's okay.
Um, I'm jealous a little bit that but I'm not in the tribe. But when my brain will not shut off, it's like you have to make time for it and then you just have to do it. And when you realize that you sleep deeper and you wake up more refreshed once you do it, it's
Hmm.
just like, oh, why didn't I figure this out 20 years
Yep.
ago? um, then so we talked about overexercising, we talked about inadequate sleep. um, Undernourishment or nutritional deficiencies is another thing that will really push that. I was talking
Hmm.
about your body gets ready to survive a famine.
Yeah.
um, and how it does, it's very interesting how that works, because how it does it is by shutting down your thyroid. I mean, it's like the high cortisol feeds back to the trigger hormones that release the cortisol and pushes them down
Mm.
so that you don't see it. It's like your thyroid is suppressed, but your TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone that comes from your brain, doesn't go up.
Hmm.
And so you end up with low thyroid signaling, low thyroid functioning in a couple of different ways that doesn't show on the TSH, particularly if you have somebody who's stressed,
Hmm. Hmm.
for whatever reason. And the thing about all those stressors is that it's like your body only has a hammer, you know? It can be a car wreck, or it can be a mean boss at work, or it can be kids that won't let you sleep, or it can be, tension with your spouse, or it can be that you run too much, or that you're trying really hard to lose weight and you're eating a 1,200 calorie diet, which I don't recommend for anybody. Um, your body reacts to every single one of those things exactly the same, which
Hmm.
is cortisol. We got to
Yeah.
survive.
Yeah. Tell us where we can find you. I know people may
Sure.
have more questions, and that's
Right.
okay. We can always do part two, or
Okay.
I can email them to Dr. Gibbs, but tell us
All
where we
right.
can find you.
Okay. Well, so my new podcast
Oh,
is
yes.
called Beyond the Thyroid, and it's on Apple Podcasts and the like. And as we speak, I am doing a 3-part series on Hashimoto's disease, but I also interview guests who have, related concerns and overlapping topics that are interrelated with hormones. And so, um, it's going to be a lot of fun. My website is danagibbsmd.com. And my socials are also danagibbsmd.com. And then on Facebook, my Facebook page is Consultants in Metabolism, which is the name of my practice.
All right, great. I will leave them here too, so everybody can click on the links.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you so much for your time. This was definitely a masterclass. I'm going to have to go back and listen to it myself.
Well, I mean, if you want to know more about thyroid, just let me know. And you can email me too, drgibbs@danagibbsmd.com. So
Fabulous.
happy to chat anytime and give people more information, because I know it's a lot of it's kind of new and not something people usually talk about. So
Exactly. Well, thank you for talking about it. Thank you for sharing your message and all that you do. And
oh, you're
thank you for
welcome.
helping the runners.
Well, I'm like in awe of the runners, I have to tell you. I really
Well,
am.
we
Oh,
appreciate all of this, and I know that it will help a lot of people. So thank you.
all right. You're welcome. And thank you very much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everyone for listening, and we will catch you on the next one. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. If you liked it, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And if you are a newer runner or a runner who hasn't run in a while and you're looking to get back into the sport, you can find out how to work with me over on my website, which is mindful-marathon.com. See you on the next episode.